"It was just a pamphlet, Mikey." That's what she said. Just a pamphlet. Like it wasn't the matchbook to a neighborhood-wide inferno. Like she hadn't just ripped out our last defense line between safe suburbia and a wildfire waiting to happen. Pamphlet. And 4 hours later, I'd be talking to a helicopter pilot named Gus with a machine that sounded like a thunderstorm had made a deal with the devil. But that morning started with a coffee cup. It was Thursday, 8 a.m. sharp. The California sun hadn't quite decided if it was going to be a friend or an enemy that day. I was halfway to my first sip of coffee on the back patio when Dave started pounding on the glass door like we were under siege. Now, Dave's not usually the excitable type. We're both north of 60, both survivors of the Cold War and cholesterol wars, both fans of quiet mornings and easy routines. But this wasn't quiet. This was panicked, gasping, wide-eyed, vein in the neck throbbing panic. "Mikey," he said, breath heaving like an old Buick on a cold day, "you gotta come see. Now." I squinted at him, coffee still in midair. "Slow down, Dave. Did Brenda leave another passive-aggressive note on my recycling bin? Was it one shade too cerulean again? Brenda Jenkins, president of our HOA, self-proclaimed queen of beige palettes and soul-crushing bylaws. A woman whose heart, I'm convinced, beats to the rhythm of municipal codes and yard maintenance violations. If God made Karen in a lab, Brenda was the deluxe model. But Dave wasn't laughing. He just pointed toward the canyon behind my property. The dry, brittle, flammable ridge that's been edging toward apocalypse every summer since the 90s. And when he finally got the words out, my blood ran colder than the last sip in my forgotten coffee. "She covered the fire trail, Mikey. It's gone." At first, I thought he meant overgrown, like some seasonal neglect. But then we got to the edge of my yard. And there it was, or more accurately, there it wasn't. The fire trail, the 10-foot strip of dirt Old Man Henderson had kept clear for decades. The same trail the fire department had marked on maps. The same trail my home insurance discounts were practically stapled to. Gone. In its place, gravel. Not just any gravel. Blinding white. Meticulously arranged. Magazine spread, gravel. Dotted with decorative grasses, those dry, feathery designer tufts that look like smoke signals waiting for a spark. The kind of crap that looks harmless until a single ember decides to dance through on a 45 miles per hour Santa Ana wind. And there she stood, clipboard in one hand, smugness in the other, directing a confused-looking gardener like she was unveiling the damn hanging gardens of HOA Babylon. She saw us and offered a smile that could melt Tupperware. "Good morning, Michael. Lovely day for community beautification, don't you think?" My jaw? On the floor. My blood pressure? Probably visible from orbit. "What in the ever-loving hell is this?" I demanded. She blinked, tilted her head like a golden retriever hearing jazz. "The fire trail, Michael. It was unsightly, overgrown. This," she gestured like Moses parting seas of stupidity, "is HOA-compliant landscaping. Gravel is a natural fire deterrent. And those grasses? Drought-tolerant. Very fashionable. I found them in a pamphlet from the county's landscaping recommendations." Pamphlet. Dave nearly choked. I could feel the anger rise in my throat like bile mixed with battery acid. "Brenda," I said, barely holding it together. "That trail was on the county fire map. That gravel is kindling with a trust fund. And those grasses? They go up faster than your temper when someone paints a mailbox the wrong taupe." She waved her clipboard like a holy text. "Michael, don't be dramatic. The fire department can always access properties from the street. This path was redundant. Besides, the new design enhances property value." Redundant. Let me tell you something about redundant. Redundant is owning 3 pairs of slippers. Redundant is 2 weather apps on your phone. Redundant is not the only strip of dirt separating your cedar fence from a 400-acre canyon primed to become a Roman candle the moment someone drops a cigarette or a lightning strike gets flirtatious. That trail was survival. I tried to keep calm. I really did. But something broke inside me at that moment. Maybe it was the dry wind rising. Maybe it was the sheer absurdity of watching a woman destroy fire defense infrastructure with the same pride someone might show while frosting a cake. But I knew this wasn't just HOA foolishness. This was danger. And the worst part? She had already finished. No votes, no warnings, no community input. Just one woman, one clipboard, and a gardener who kept muttering, "I just do what I'm told, man," like a mantra against guilt. I called the HOA board. Emergency Zoom. Brenda's face filled the screen like a bad omen in a horror movie. She repeated the same crap. Pamphlet says it's safe. Gravel is natural. Michael is being hysterical. The board, bless their useless souls, just nodded along like underpaid extras in a courtroom drama. One guy even said, "Well, the pamphlet did have some nice pictures." Pictures. Are we planning to show the wildfire some nice pictures? Will a laminated brochure save us when we're hosing down rooftops with garden hoses and praying for a miracle? I called the fire department. Nice guy answered. Captain Rodriguez said, "Look man, I agree it's dumb. But unless it's actively burning, our hands are tied." City planning said they'd look into it. The HOA wouldn't reverse it. Everyone agreed it was idiotic, but no one could act. The system was too slow, too polite, too damn beige. And so I stood in my garage, pacing like a man who just realized the firestorm was coming and his best defense had been replaced by a Martha Stewart crime scene. Dave sat on a stool, shaking his head. "So what do we do?" he asked. "That's the question, isn't it? What do you do when the rules are rigged, the bureaucracy is broken, and a power-mad HOA president is playing God with your safety? What do you do when by the book is a death sentence? You go off book." I looked around my garage. Tools, plans. A framed photo caught my eye, me standing next to an old friend, Bertha. An Ericsson S-64 Skycrane helicopter. She wasn't just metal and rotors. She was potential, muscle, authority. She was louder than Brenda and faster than bureaucracy. And just like that, the spark lit in my brain. Not a spark of fire, a spark of defiance. Because if Brenda thought a pamphlet could undo decades of safety, I was going to show her what a real directive looked like. Not in a meeting, not in a memo, but in a way she'd never forget. This wasn't about landscaping anymore. This was about reclaiming common sense. And if I had to do it with a helicopter, then so be it. For minutes, that's what the title said. For minutes from ignition to impact. But let me tell you something, friend. It all started here. With a coffee cup, a clueless HOA queen, and a fire trail turned into a gravel death trap. This isn't just a story. It's a warning, a battle cry, because one day it won't be your bushes they trim or your mailbox they repaint. One day, it'll be your last line of defense they erase with a smile and a brochure. And when that day comes, I hope you remember this. A pamphlet can destroy, but sometimes the only thing that can stop it is a man willing to make some noise. You ever watch a man try to reason with a storm? That's what it felt like when I dialed into that emergency HOA board Zoom call. My face was still flushed from pacing the yard, and my fingers trembled slightly from a mix of fury and disbelief. I clicked the link, hoping, no, praying, that at least one person on that board had retained a single ounce of common sense. But as soon as Brenda's face filled the screen, all beige walls and sterile lighting behind her, I knew I was stepping into a battle where logic had already bled out on the carpet. "Let's begin," she chirped, like we were about to discuss flower beds, not community safety in a fire zone. I don't know if it was her tone, that bureaucratic faux warmth dipped in condescension, or the way she adjusted her glasses like she was preparing to administer a pop quiz on obedience, but I felt something tighten in my chest. "Brenda," I said, voice level but already strained. "You removed a county-documented firebreak. Do you understand what that means?" She smiled, the kind of smile only HOA presidents and DMV supervisors can perfect. "Michael, as I mentioned in my memo, the prior condition of that space was unacceptable, unattractive, unregulated. We've simply replaced it with a safer, more appealing alternative." "Appealing?" I snapped. "To who? Fire marshals? Insurance auditors? To the goddamn Santa Ana winds?" My voice had risen, But it wasn't yelling. It was alarm, urgency. She leaned forward, as if she were about to soothe a child. I consulted a professional guide to fire-resistant landscaping. A pamphlet, I corrected. You consulted a pamphlet, Brenda. Not a fire marshal. Not the county. A trifold brochure probably printed in 2006 by someone who's never even been west of Bakersfield. I turned to the board members, whose expressions ranged from bored to mildly uncomfortable. This isn't about gravel or property values. This is about a community line of defense. That fire trail wasn't ornamental. It was operational. Arthur, the treasurer, cleared his throat. I think Brenda made a compelling case. The pictures she showed, they were quite nice. The only thing worse than ignorance is ignorance dressed up in politeness. I felt like I was shouting into a padded cell. The rest of the board nodded like bobbleheads with nothing left inside but HOA dogma and indifference. Brenda clapped her hands lightly. I think we can move on to the next agenda item. Fence paint colors. You're insane, I muttered. What was that, Michael? She asked, eyes sharpening like claws unsheathed. You're actively endangering this neighborhood, and you don't even care. You think this is about aesthetics? You've put us all in a tinderbox and handed nature the match. She pursed her lips, then clicked something on her laptop. My voice went silent. Muted. That's right. They muted me. I watched myself flail on the screen like a goldfish gasping in a bowl of vinegar while Brenda smoothly transitioned to talking about how Periwinkle was too aggressive for garage doors. They neutered the conversation because the truth was inconvenient. Too loud. Too real. So I pivoted. I needed someone with authority. Someone who wouldn't mute me because my truth was too inconvenient for their Thursday agenda. I called the local fire department again and managed to get a hold of a guy named Captain Rodriguez. His voice was calm, practiced, with the weary edge of a man who's seen too much dumb and too little sense. I laid it all out. The destroyed fire trail, the gravel and ornamental grasses, the fire map, the risk, the timing. Look, Mr. Thompson, he said after a long sigh. You're right. Everything you're describing sounds like a nightmare. But unless there's an active fire or visible violation of fire codes, our hands are tied. HOA rules operate like private governments. We can't just waltz in and order them to put a dirt path back. But it was a defensible space. I shouted into the phone. Yes, and now it's not, he said, grim. And that's going to make our job harder if anything goes down out there. I'll send someone to talk to her. Maybe we can do a site visit next week. Next week? I barked. Rodriguez, the Santa Ana winds are coming this weekend. I know, he said, softer now. But like I said, until flames are licking up porch steps, our legal hands are zip-tied. So much for official channels. City planning was worse. Endless forms. Promises to review. Vague bureaucratic loops that led nowhere. One guy even told me to attend the next monthly zoning review session. Sir, I said, that's 26 days from now. The canyon doesn't care about your calendar. Meanwhile, Brenda was holding her own little kingdom steady. I saw her out one afternoon, clipboard in hand again, this time inspecting someone's mailbox alignment. I swear to you she was humming, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't committed civic arson with her precious gravel and gentrified weeds. The smell of eucalyptus and dry chaparral hung in the air like a warning. One gust of wind and that whole ridge could light up like a Roman torch festival. That night, I sat in my garage again. Dave showed up with a six-pack and a worried look. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me a beer, sat down on the workbench and watched me pace. Finally, he said, "So what now? We call the governor." "No," I said. "We make our own plan." His eyebrows lifted, cautious. "Plan like letter to the editor plan? Or plan like we're about to be on the 10 o'clock news plan?" "Neither," I said. "Something in between. Something loud, legal, and immediate." He sipped his beer. "You still got Gus's number?" I didn't answer. I just picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't dialed in years. Gus Skygod McTavish. retired military, now private contractor, aerial logistics expert, and one of the few men I've ever trusted with something as stubborn as gravity. Before I hit call, Dave said, "Mike, you're serious." "Dead," I said, serious as dry brush in August. The call rang twice before Gus answered with his usual growl. "If you're calling me, Thompson, it means something heavy needs moving or something stupid needs fixing. Which is it?" "Both," I said, "and I'm paying cash." There was a pause, a sigh, then a chuckle. "How stupid we talking?" "HOA stupid." "Ah, hell," he said. "Give me 3 hours." That was the moment the tide turned. Not in a meeting room, not with a petition or a debate or a strongly worded email. It turned in a garage lit by a single bulb, with the quiet hum of 2 men too old for this crap and too stubborn to back down. We weren't rebels. We weren't heroes. We were just tired. Tired of watching common sense get buried under decorative gravel and pamphlets written by people who never risked anything real. Brenda thought she could silence me with a mute button. But she forgot one thing: old men don't quit. We don't shrink when the wind picks up. We plant our feet deeper. So I went to war. Not with violence. Not with anger. But with the one thing bureaucracy can't prepare for: action. And a helicopter named Bertha. Because if they weren't going to listen to reason, I'd speak in a language louder than HOA policy. Rotor blades. Wind. Earth torn back to truth. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. And God help anyone who stood between me and what was right. The first thing I did wasn't to call Gus back. The first thing I did was measure. Yeah, measure. With an actual tape. Old school. Knees in the dirt. Crawling around the back of my property like a lunatic surveyor. I needed to know if Bertha, Gus's beautiful, temperamental, overpowered Skycrane, could safely land or hover in the space I was staking out. My backyard isn't a helipad. It's a man's backyard. Grass too patchy in places, an aging oak too close to the southeast corner, and a grill that hadn't worked right since the Bush administration. I measured every inch like I was preparing for a moon landing. Then I yanked out 2 rose bushes with my bare hands and used my snowblower to clear a path through decorative bark. My neighbors probably thought I was losing my mind. They weren't entirely wrong. I went inside, wiped the dirt off my palms, and called Gus. "Elsie's tight but doable," I told him. "What's the job?" he asked again. "Because I've flown pipe across the Rockies and dropped steel beams in weather that would make Satan shiver. But I've never done landscaping with a 40,000-pound chopper." "You're about to," I said, and I told him everything. I could hear him chuckle, low and slow, when I got to the part about Brenda and the gravel. "You HOA people are something else. You want me to bring Bertha in and just mulch the hell out of it?" "Not just mulch," I said. "Surgical strike. One fire trail. Same as it ever was. Nothing else touched. I want to restore what Brenda erased, and make sure no one forgets it." "You want this to be loud," he said. "I want it to be unforgettable," I replied. "And I'll double your normal rate." There was a long silence. I imagined him staring out at his hangar, mentally walking through Bertha's rotors, fuel burn, weight limits, wind direction. "Thompson," he finally said, "you're one of the most stubborn sons of bitches I've ever worked with. And I flew you into that canyon project back in '03 when your engineers forgot gravity existed." "That was a good day," I said. "You almost dropped a generator on a bear." "Details," he grunted. "All right, I'll fuel her up. I want cash in hand, and I want no interference. You get me a ground crew to finish the job after I clear it. This isn't a joyride." "Done," I said. "We fly tomorrow." I hung up and called Chad and Brad. Now, Chad and Brad are the kind of guys who think a lawnmower should sound like a Harley and that OSHA is more of a suggestion than a rulebook. But they're fast, efficient, and most importantly, they owe me a favor. "I've got a job," I told Chad. "Emergency vegetation abatement." "Mikey," he said, "we're booked for 3 weeks. Can't push those clients. I'll triple your rate." Pause. "What kind of job?" 200 yards of brush clearing, 10 feet wide. "But you're not doing the heavy lifting. That's coming from above." "From above?" Brad piped in from the background. Like God. Close, I said. Like Bertha. There was another pause. Then a whistle. You're flying a Skycrane into your backyard? Chad asked. That's nuts. No, I said. It's necessary. We'll be there, he replied. But if we get hit by a stray rotor blade, you're paying our hospital bills. Deal. With my air support and ground team secured, I spent the rest of the evening marking out the old fire trail with spray paint, setting up visual flags, and digging out a spot to place a large windsock I stole from an abandoned airfield a decade ago. Yes, I have a windsock. No, I'm not crazy. I'm prepared. Always have been. Ask any man who's lived long enough in the hills of California and he'll tell you the same. You don't wait for disaster. You outpace it. The next morning, I got up before dawn, made coffee so strong it could remove rust, checked the wind. No gusts yet, but the forecast warned they were coming. Brenda, bless her punctual little heart, was already out front, clipboarding a neighbor's lavender patch like she was the queen of suburbia. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and decided ignoring me was safer. I double-checked my equipment, radios, flags, exit points. Dave showed up with donuts and a camera. I figured we might want footage, he said. Also figured you'd forget to eat. I forget nothing, I said, grabbing a jelly-filled. At 12:41 p.m., I heard the first thump. Not loud, not yet, just a distant, rhythmic thud that made my bones vibrate before my ears even caught it. I smiled. Bertha was coming. By 12:45, every window in a 6-house radius was rattling. Brenda stepped onto her porch with a look of indignation only matched by her terror. Phones came out. Neighbors gathered. Even Officer Ramirez drove by, parked down the block, and leaned on his cruiser to enjoy the show. And then she crested the ridge. Big, orange, and absolutely unapologetic. Bertha looked like a dragon made of steel and fire, her twin rotors churning the sky into a froth. She hovered for a moment, majestic and menacing, as if deciding whether this suburb was worth sparing. Then she dipped, slow and deliberate, hovering directly over my backyard. Gus's voice crackled in my radio. Thompson, you're insane, but the LZ's good. Ready on your call. Engage, I said. Bertha lowered her payload. Not a water bucket, not a supply crate, a custom-fabricated mulching head, 12 feet wide, studded with titanium blades. Gus adjusted her position with surgeon precision. Then, with a thunderous roar, the blades began to spin. The decorative gravel stood no chance. The mulch head chewed it like breakfast cereal. The ornamental grasses went up like fireworks in reverse. Shredded, airborne, reduced to confetti. Brenda screamed something unintelligible from across the street. Bertha didn't care. She kept cutting. Every foot of earth that had been desecrated by HOA vanity was returned to its rightful state, bare, defensible, fire-safe dirt. For minutes, that's all it took. Gus was a master. When he lifted the spinning blades and banked left for a victory circle, the firebreak was back. Perfect. Better than before. Trail cleared, Gus said. Bertha's hungry, but satisfied. You owe me. Send me the invoice, I said. I'll frame it. Brenda stormed the yard as Bertha disappeared behind the canyon. Her hair was a mess, her beige suit stained with dust, and there was a single blade of ornamental grass sticking out of her bun like a white flag. You maniac, she shrieked. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. You've violated landscaping codes, noise ordinances, FAA regulations, and saved the neighborhood, I said calmly. Don't forget that part. The neighbors didn't clap, but they didn't frown either. Some smiled, some nodded. One old guy 2 doors down saluted. Dave handed me a donut. Well, he said, that was something. Yeah, I replied. It was. And deep down, I knew it wasn't just about gravel or grass. It was about the principle. The fire trail wasn't the only thing Brenda tried to erase. She tried to erase common sense. Tried to erase the right of a man to defend his home with more than polite emails. Well, not today. Today, gravity and rotor blades sided with the stubborn old guy who wouldn't stay muted. And tomorrow we'd see what her lawyers had to say. But for now, we had dirt. Blessed, beautiful, bare dirt. And it never looked better. I knew it wasn't over. Not even close. You don't fly a 20,000-pound helicopter into a manicured neighborhood, shred the HOA president's vision of aesthetic harmony, and expect everyone to just go back to barbecuing like nothing happened. Especially not when the person you just embarrassed in front of every neighbor with a smartphone is Brenda Jenkins, a woman whose belief in rules isn't just obsessive, it's borderline religious. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was nervous. No, it was adrenaline, pride, and maybe just a hint of anticipation. Brenda's counterattack was coming. That was inevitable. But what form it would take? Well, that's what kept me sitting on the patio, beer in hand, watching the moonlight reflect off the newly restored firebreak like a badge of honor carved into the earth. Around 6 a.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a courier, young kid, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, holding a cream-colored envelope like it was radioactive. I didn't even have to look. Legal firm branding, overly ornate typeface, probably scented with disdain. She moved fast, the kid muttered, handing it over. Lady who sent this had a clipboard and a look like she wanted to file complaints against gravity. That's her, I said, signing with a wink. The Queen of Covenants. Inside the envelope, a cease and desist letter from Jenkins, Throckmorton and Blight LLP. Brenda's personal legal hit squad. I poured a coffee and started reading. It accused me of everything short of war crimes. Unauthorized alteration of common area, operation of unpermitted aircraft, destruction of community-approved landscaping, endangerment of decorative flora, and my personal favorite, infliction of emotional distress upon ornamental elements of the shared environment. I read that line twice, out loud, then laughed so hard I spilled coffee on the rug. I called Carol. Now, Carol's my lawyer, and if I'm being honest, she's the kind of woman who could make a Supreme Court justice feel like they missed a memo. She picked up on the second ring. Michael, she said, voice dry as toast. I just got a copy of the HOA's complaint. Did you actually deploy a helicopter to landscape your backyard? It wasn't just landscaping, I said. It was tactical fire mitigation. And the rotor wash? She asked. Collateral beautification, I replied. Besides, I've got weather reports, risk assessments, and even a fire marshal's report that identifies that stretch as critical defensible space. So let me get this straight, she continued. You reestablished a county-mapped firebreak that the HOA president removed during an active fire warning week, and you did it using a licensed, FAA-cleared aerial contractor with emergency vegetation mitigation experience? Exactly, I said. Then this letter, she said, flipping pages, is mostly hot air and posturing. Still, don't do anything dumb. Yet. Define dumb, I said, eyeing my chainsaw on the garage wall. No retaliation, she warned. Just hold your ground. I'll draft a response that'll sting like a wasp in her pantyhose. That should have been enough. But of course it wasn't. Brenda wasn't trying to win a legal case. She was trying to win the narrative. By mid-morning, she'd already summoned a special HOA emergency session, complete with printed agendas left on every porch. The title? Community Response to Unilateral Actions by Mr. Michael Thompson. I almost framed mine. Dave called. You going? Wouldn't miss it for the world, I said. Want to make popcorn? I'll bring lawn chairs, he said. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse, an over-air-conditioned beige tomb filled with folding chairs, passive-aggressive muffins, and that faint scent of dry erase markers and broken dreams. Brenda stood at the front like Patton addressing the troops, clipboard in hand, suit freshly pressed. The turnout was impressive. Even the Henderson twins showed up, and they haven't been seen since the pool noodle fight of 2019. Brenda opened with a slideshow. I kid you not. First slide? A photo of the firebreak pre-incident, looking like a garden magazine cover. Second slide? The same spot post-Bertha. Raw dirt, some scattered gravel, and what I personally consider a testament to civic duty. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, what you are seeing here is not simply vandalism. It is a declaration of war on our standards, our bylaws, and our very identity as a community. Someone coughed. I think it was Ramirez. He was in the back, sipping soda and clearly enjoying himself. Mr. Thompson, she continued, turning to me with a smile so tight it could snap piano wire, has undertaken an aerial assault on our landscaping, bypassed established channels, and endangered our peace. Our peace, I said, standing. Brenda, you removed a firebreak during fire season. That landscaping was a matchstick buffet. Murmurs rippled. Some of the older residents nodded. A woman near the back whispered, "My insurance went up after that." "That's not relevant," Brenda snapped. "You used a helicopter." "A helicopter. Safest, fastest way to restore a critical fire barrier," I said. "Also super cool." "This isn't about being cool," she growled. "This is about following rules, order, respect for procedure, and safety," I replied. "Let's not forget that. You know who respects rules? Fires. Fires love rules. That's why they politely skip over ornamental grass when they see a gravel path with an HOA permit." Laughter, suppressed but real. Dave elbowed me. Brenda pressed on. "Therefore, I propose immediate sanctions. A $5,000 fine, suspension of Mr. Thompson's community privileges, and mandatory restoration of the original landscaping at his expense." "You're fining me for saving your house," I said. "For saving everyone's houses." "You didn't follow protocol," she replied. "You didn't submit a landscaping alteration request form 4B, subsection C. That did it." I turned to the room. "Show of hands," I said. "Who here would prefer gravel and decorative grass during red flag season over a proper firebreak?" Not one hand. Not one. Even Brenda's husband, a nervous man with a permanent sunburn, shifted in his seat. I looked at Brenda. "I'm not paying your fine. I'm not planting flammable weeds. And I'm not apologizing for doing the right thing when you were too wrapped up in rules to recognize a risk." Brenda opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Officer Ramirez raised a hand. "Just for the record," he said, standing, "I did contact the county fire department. They confirmed that the area behind Mr. Thompson's property is a mapped firebreak and falls under recommended defensible space guidelines. Just thought that should be noted." Brenda's face froze like she'd swallowed a lemon. Meeting adjourned shortly after. No vote was taken. No fine issued. But Brenda wasn't done. The next day, a landscaping crew showed up at the edge of my yard. Brenda had hired them, out of pocket apparently, to reintroduce compliant foliage. I stood on my porch. "You touch one blade of grass on my side, and I'll have Carol file so many injunctions your grandchildren will need legal aid." They left, quietly. That night, someone egged my garage door. Real mature. But I didn't retaliate. I cleaned it off, fixed my motion lights, and left out a trail cam. Next time, I'd have video. Because here's the thing about Brenda types, they count on silence. On people backing down. On rulebooks being scarier than right and wrong. But me? I've lived long enough to know when to shut up and when to stand tall. And with Bertha's rotor wash still etched into the dirt, it was clear. This fight wasn't about landscaping. It was about dignity. And I wasn't letting go. The morning after the egging incident, I found myself standing in my driveway, coffee in one hand, garden hose in the other, staring down at the drying remnants of someone's passive-aggressive omelet on my garage door. It had baked in overnight, crusted into a mosaic of yolk and cowardice. Somewhere in the cul-de-sac, Brenda Jenkins was probably watching from behind her drapes, sipping her chamomile and whispering to herself that justice had been served. But if she thought this was going to push me into retreat, she clearly hadn't spent enough time around veterans, stubborn old engineers, or anyone raised before the internet taught people to whine before they acted. I wasn't born yesterday. I was born in a world where people fixed things with duct tape and spit and settled disputes with a handshake or, when necessary, a showdown at the fence line. I rinsed the eggs off, dried the siding, and then did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I ordered a custom flag. It arrived 3 days later. Bright red background, bold white letters, defensible space equals common sense. I hoisted it up the pole on the corner of my lot, just below the American flag. Some folks nodded in approval when they passed. Others averted their eyes like I'd hung up a dirty joke. But Brenda? Oh, Brenda practically choked on her gardenia tea when she saw it flapping in the breeze. She didn't come to my door. She didn't need to. I saw the HOA website that night. A new post from President Jenkins, titled "A Time for Decorum," standing against extremism in our community. It was full of flowery language about maintaining unity, preserving aesthetic tranquility, and a veiled paragraph that all but accused me of starting a militia. There was a part about non-compliant signage and unauthorized displays, which I knew was code for my flag. The kicker? She called for a community vote, a full HOA referendum on whether or not the fire break should be reinstated, and if homeowners had the right to take independent emergency actions without board approval. I swear to you, I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my scotch. Brenda was trying to weaponize democracy against fire prevention. I called Dave. "You see this crap? Just read it," he said. "She's calling it the Bertha provision." "Unreal," I said. "She wants a vote to outlaw common sense." "Which means," Dave said, "we organize." That week I went door to door. Not yelling, not threatening, just talking. Like the way things used to be done. I brought printouts, fire zone maps, photos from the last blaze that almost jumped the canyon. I told them about the discount my insurer gave me for the fire break, about how it was county mapped and fire department endorsed. I didn't talk about helicopters. I talked about grandkids, about Sunday dinners that could be gone in a puff of wind and dry brush if the wrong spark hit. People listened. Some were skeptical. Others thanked me. One old guy, Hank, a Korean War vet with a bad hip and a sharper tongue than mine, just nodded and said, "Took guts." I respect that. A few folks even admitted they'd started clearing their own backyards better. Not because they liked me, but because the trail reminded them what was at stake. Still, Brenda had her followers. The ones who cared more about uniform gravel and HOA bylaws than wildfire risk. They talked about property values, like you can sell a house made of ashes. One guy, Todd, a real estate agent with 2 white teeth and a Range Rover he couldn't parallel park, gave a whole speech about optics and how helicopters weren't good for the neighborhood brand. I asked him if the brand included burning to the ground. He didn't have an answer. The vote was scheduled for a Saturday morning, at the clubhouse again. Dave brought donuts this time, part morale, part strategy. Nothing softens resistance like carbs. Brenda showed up in beige, clipboard in one hand, legal packet in the other. She had charts, pie graphs, even a printed testimonial from some landscape architect in another state who said gravel enhanced the cooling impression of semi-arid environments. I had Captain Rodriguez. He couldn't officially endorse anything, but he came in uniform, sat in the front, and when the mic was offered for community comments, he stood up and said, "We fight fires from fire breaks, not from ornamental grass." Mic drop. The vote was closer than I expected. A lot of folks were on the fence, torn between fear of fire and fear of Brenda. But in the end, the result was 61-39 in favor of keeping the fire break and amending the bylaws to allow emergency mitigation without prior HOA approval during red flag warnings. Brenda didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there like a broken wax statue, lips pressed into a line so tight it could have sliced a lemon. She left before the meeting ended. But I stayed. I shook hands. I thanked people. I even offered to help the board draft the new guidelines. A week later, the trail was formally marked with county signs. Official now. No longer just Mikey's Mile, but a documented part of the community's fire defense infrastructure. That evening, Dave and I stood by the edge of the trail, watching the sun go down over the ridge. "You think it's over?" he asked. "With Brenda? With people like Brenda?" I said. "It's never over, but it's quiet for now." "You ever think you'd be the guy who took on an HOA and won?" "Not once," I said. "But I'll tell you this. There comes a time in every man's life where he's got to ask himself what he's willing to put up with. And when that line gets crossed, you either raise hell or shut up. I'm not the shut up type." "No," Dave laughed. You're the type who calls in a Skycrane. Damn right I am, I said, raising my beer to the canyon. And in the quiet twilight, with the wind cool against my face and the trail gleaming like a scar carved by justice, I knew something for certain. This wasn't just about grass or gravel or bylaws. It was about the right to protect what matters. About saying no to stupid, even when stupid wears pearls and files permits. And I hoped, hell, I really hoped, that somewhere, some other guy standing on his porch with a clipboard-wielding neighbor breathing down his neck would hear this story and think, if Mikey could stand up, so can I. And maybe, just maybe, next time someone tries to bury common sense under a layer of decorative stones, they'll think twice. Because somewhere out there, Bertha might just be fueling up.